English. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And recording. Cool. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to vBrownbag US. This evening, we are continuing our class on the AWS Solutions Architect Associate Certification. Tonight, we're going to talk Domain 3, Data Security, with the fashionably dressed Anthony Chow. He is at vCloudTrail. And for a couple of little housekeeping notes, get in on the conversation at vBrownbag, and Mr. Malhoit will be watching the Twitters this evening and keeping track of any questions that you guys pose there. Also, you can chat with us live in the chat channel here, obviously. Tonight, as I said before, our guest is the illustrious Anthony Chow. He's at vCloudTrail. His website is cloudn1n3.blogspot.com. My name is Chris Williams. Tonight we've got the dynamic duo of Chris and Chris at Mistwire and at Chris M550. And without further ado, where is my attendees? There they are. All right, Anthony, you are now the presenter.
Hi. Hello, everyone. You see my screen? Show my screen. Let me click.
Now we can. Yep, there you go.
Yeah, see, like I said, I chose a similar theme on the slide deck.
Perfect.
Okay, welcome to this episode of vBrownbag, where we will discuss Domain 3 of the Amazon Web Services Solution Architect Associate Level Exam. Like I said, my name is Anthony Chow. I'm in Los Angeles. I am a software developer, and I'm passionate on sharing what I know to the community. And this is why I signed up to have this podcast. I am on Twitter, and I also like to blog about different aspects of technology. I was a VCP 4 or 5 in cloud, but then because I ventured into something else, I did not renew my license. So all that hard work is all gone. And the worst thing is that I have to retake the expensive class before I can recertify, so I'm not sure if I would try that route again. But anyway, if situation is required, I might take that route again. Okay. To seek for any certification, the first thing I do is to look at the exam objectives, because this gives a roadmap as to what we need to study. Let's get a general picture, and it will tell us what is being tested. Plus, it also gives us an outline on the topics that we need to master. And today, we're going to look at Domain 3 of the Amazon Web Services Solution Architect Exam, Data Security. The weight of this section is just 20%. There's been roughly 20% of the questions on this exam are on data security. This is the title of the data security, or at least this is the header of the exam objective. It's in two sections. 3.1 is recognize and implement secure practices for optimal cloud deployment and maintenance. And then in 3.2 is recognize critical data disaster recovery techniques and the implementation. So these are the two main topics that we are going to discuss. This diagram is taken from the exam objective document, and it further explain what more detail as to what will be tested in the exam. And of course, this is the study resource that I have used to prepare for the exam. Now, well, we have this vBrownbag series, and I think this is a very rich content for us to study. And of course, there are paid subscriptions. ACloudGuru is a very nice resource, Cloud Academy and Linux Academy. And by far, I like the style of ACloudGuru the best because it's specifically geared toward helping us to pass the exam. And the contents are also very precise with practice sets, or you have to have hands-on practices so you can know how to go into Amazon Web Service to configure different things. And last but not least, we have Amazon Web Services does a very good job in their website. If you go into the website, there are tons of good information about its services that you can look at, and in specific, there is one one URL is the aws.amazon.com security, where you can find different valuable resources. Because of course, our goal is not just to pass the exam, but to be a successful solution architect. So we should check on that website from time to time to keep up with what's going on or what is the latest. And I think reInvent is coming up in 2 or 3 months, and I'm sure they have new announcements or new features that we need to catch up on again in a few months' time. And if you go to YouTube, Amazon Web Services has tons of good information also. And there's also the white paper from AWS, which are very well written and is very informational. And speaking about white paper, there are the few white paper that is very specific to security listed here in this slide. There are three different white paper that are highlighted in green, and they are very important. And I think we should read them before sitting into the exam. And they are the AWS Security Best Practices, Overview of Security Processes, and also the AWS Risk and Compliance White Paper. All these three are very well written, and then we need to know the content of this white paper before we go into the exam. Before we move on, I think it is very crucial that we understand some of the security basics, because that will help us to understand the white paper as well to understand the content. There's the CIA, and if you talk about security, we should always refer to CIA. And of course, this is not a central intelligence agency, but it is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In essence, we think security, we think of these three suspects to protect our data, being it information of our customer, or as an intellectual property, or even some secret recipe for making your restaurant, being a 3-star Michelin restaurant. Why I say that? Because I was on YouTube watching some YouTuber. They go to different places and try different food, and I was fascinated about how they can create so rich content by going around eating different nice food, and then they'll be earning money from that too. So today I pick let's say to explain the CIA triad. Let's say that we pick a secret recipe for making a delicious duck dish that make your restaurant famous. For confidentiality, you want to keep it a secret. Only certain people can access to this recipe. We need access control. So we put that piece of the paper or put that in a safety deposit box. We need the key and the fingerprint to have access. And by the way, if we have a key and a fingerprint, this is something called a two-factor authentication. Something you have and something you know, and this is a very important concept about two-factor authentication. If you have two keys, it is not necessary two-factor authentication. This is only a two-tier authentication. To be specific, if you need a two-key, multi-key, two-key authentication, you need to have something you have and something you know, which is a password or some kind of something you process, like your fingerprint or your some kind of mobile devices to generate the password. So we need to safeguard, and this is called confidentiality. We need to keep so that we have access control on the things that we need to safeguard. For integrity, we do not want the recipe to be tampered with. You do not want your competitors to change 2 teaspoons of salt to be 2 serving spoons of salt. If you transfer the recipe from a safety deposit box to your restaurant, how do you protect this? Again, if the recipe is stored electronically on AWS Cloud, you want to retrieve that from AWS to your computer. How do you make sure the recipe is safe? Of course, we can use HTTPS and also use a hashing function with a secret key so you can verify the content, and this is called integrity. These days, people say data is the new gold. Well, if we need to make the data, we need to be available when we need it. So even if we have a recipe, we need to be available. While your competitor may want to make sure you don't have the recipe when you need it. Let's say you are invited to do a catering job at White House event, if the recipe is stored electronically in AWS, you want it to be available when you need it, or when the system, if the system crash, or you be able to not to retrieve the recipe, then it's no good for you. Let's say if during Christmas time, online retail store, the availability of the system is very important. Your competitor may give you DOS attack and then you not be able to have your system available and you're losing your business. So these are the CIA triad of security. And there's also the security best practices, which are data in use, data in transit, and data at rest. This should be very self-explanatory. Data at rest is where we store the data in S3 buckets, Glacier, or database in the AWS cloud. Data has to move around from one entity to another, and that's in transit. And lastly, data in use is where the data is being used by the application. So how do we apply the CIA principle to the data at the three different stages? Usually, we will use access control to protect the data in use. We'll use SSL TLS to protect the data in transit, and when we use encryption to protect the data at rest. For data in use, it is a usual good practice to clear the memory of RAM or that is being used by the application. My last project at Alcatel-Lucent is to make our software pass the common criteria certification. And one of my job is to go into the software and to make sure to check the password of the user as zero out after it's being used, as well as all the password fields in RAM and memory are clear when the user is being deleted. So this is very important security basic as we go into this domain. So far, is there any question or comments?
No, we are good so far.
Okay, let's move on. This picture is, I think it's a famous picture that we all need to know, because this is the very fundamental and important concept for AWS. It's the shared security responsibility. Right it is very difficult to remember this picture, but there's one way. If you look at the right-hand side of the picture, you said there is two lines. You see the customer and AWS. One way good to remember, especially if you are in an exam and you're not quite sure about the answer, customer is responsible for the security in the cloud, where AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. We're going to do this in a more detail later on, but this is one thing that we must master, is that who is responsible on this piece, and I'm sure there will be exam question asking who is responsible for the security of a particular module in the cloud or within the system or within the setup. So this is, we have to remember, customer is responsible security in the cloud, whereas AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. And of course, AWS is a well-established company, I would say, and it supplies built-in security feature. And as a solution architect, I think it's very essential, not just to pass the exam, but it's essential that we know what is some of the built-in security features that we can use. Those are the tools that can help us to make design decisions as to how we architect a solution. And of course, like if you go in with the VCDX route, it is not so much about what kind of solution you have chosen. It is why you have chosen this solution and how does it affect and what are the pros and cons of this particular solutions versus some other solutions. So I think as a solution architect, when we are preparing for the exam, we just do not just go and say, oh, this is how we configure this, how we configure that. Those are a different aspect. I think these are being tested with the SysOp certification. But for this solution architect exam, we will be more focused on how do we choose the different solutions or different tools for us to architect a solution. And of course, if you look at all these built-in security features in number 4, protection data at rest. We already talked about this basic principles. So I think this is essential that we talk about those early on, because as you will go on to the white paper of AWS, they refer to these concepts quite a bit, and it is important for us to grasp this idea. Okay. One of the exam, and I was told, this white paper is very important for the exam because lots of questions is being derived from this white paper, and then so we need to but since this is so important, let's take a look at this. We try to go through some of the important points in this white paper. And of course, you see the confidentiality, integrity, and availability is in the first line of the first paragraph of the introduction. So AWS is adhering to this the security principle to design its security products and to design the whole system. And then, as I said, in this document, it talks about the shared responsibility between the customer and AWS. You say, customer maintain the complete control over the content and are responsible for all these things. So this is, I think, we need to take a look and understand. And this is a kind of a picture that we see before. The AWS is responsible for the global infrastructure, and also the customer is responsible for the rest. With one exception, AWS is also responsible for something called the managed service. Because if we look at AWS as infrastructure as a service, the global infrastructure is what it should provide security to. But for managed service, which is more, it says PaaS. There's something like this is example managed service. With example of this service include Amazon, DynamoDB, RDS, Redshift, the Elastic MapReduce. These are the responsibility of AWS. Maybe some of the question will ask who is responsible to update the OS and patching, but it's already very well spelled out that AWS is responsible for the basic security for the OS and the patching of the software. And then later on it goes on to talk about who is further explain the customer security responsibility. For me, the outline or the layout of this white paper is not very well done, but at least it has all the information, and so we need to understand it. I should have organized this white paper a little bit better, so it's very easy to understand, because the concept jumps back and forth between different, even though they have these kind of headlines, but sometimes whatever they talk about inside the white paper, they jump back and forth, so we need to be aware of what we are looking at. And I think this is, on this page, page 10, is AWS Compliance Program. If we Google AWS Compliant, we can always find the keyword. AWS is very audit friendly. And then one thing is that we need to know the infrastructure that we provide is being certified for this. SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, FISMA, you have the PCI level 1, you also later on you have this HIPAA. So when we use the infrastructure of AWS, we know that the infrastructure already is certified or complying to these programs, these standards. So we can tell the external auditors that the infrastructure portion is okay. And this is, I think, some of the questions will be on this compliance. And later on in this white paper, I talk about the physical security, how it protects the infrastructure, all the servers. I think one of the key things is it might be asked in an exam is the storage device commissioning. Let me read from this. When a storage device has reached the end of the useful life, AWS procedures include a decommissioning process. I think we need to know about this decommissioning process is that the data in the device will be zeroed out, and then the device itself will be physically destroyed. I think we have to remember this as we go into an exam. And then it talks about availability. go on. For we will talk on network security, and then this network AWS has firewall other boundary devices. This is for the infrastructure security to protect the infrastructure. And then all APIs, we need to know that all APIs endpoints, they allow HTTP and HTTPS. And then when you access, we have the SSL termination of a load balancer is a FIPS compliant also. And I think another thing is that we have also AWS also have the IPsec VPN if it is necessary to connect. And the one thing is that we need to understand AWS corporate network is separate from AWS cloud network. I think this might be a question on this also, that we to see if the two networks are connected or not. And another thing is that in order to access, I think there's a Bostonian host. I think today Scott Lowe just had a blog out talking about using a Bostonian host to access some private instances in AWS. I think it's worth looking into it. I think this is also an important concept as we go into an exam. The next thing is we move on. It talks about different regions. It talks about the monitoring and protection. I think this is important to know that AWS utilizes a wide variety of automated monitoring systems to provide high level of service performance and availability. And again, this is one of the security basics that the system has or the data has to be available. And it's also provide the tools designed to detect unusual or unauthorized activities. So this is something we need to know about. And then this few examples, the AWS is able to prevent all this. I think this is one of the exam objectives too that we need to know is DOS mitigation. Then this is how AWS it describes how AWS will prevent DOS attack, man-in-the-middle attack, IP spoofing, how it does it, and also for port scanning. I think one thing we need to realize is that port scanning is mostly for pen testing. We can, as a customer, can do pen tests on our resources, but before that, it's very important that we need written authorization before we do anything. Not just written. I don't think it's mentioned about anywhere in this here, but I think from my experience is that for written authorization to do a pen test, not just being authorized, but you also need to specify the scope of the testing specifically so that we will not get into any legal problems. If we work on our work, we don't necessarily fire up Nmap or Metasploit to scan the production network. So this is not a good practice, and you may get in trouble with that even though it is with your own company. So I think we need to make sure we understand for port scanning, if we do any pen tests on our resources, we need to get written approval beforehand, so before we can proceed. And also let's talk about how it prevents packet sniffing with other tenants, because this is for isolation. So let's move on to another important big topic is the AWS access. It talks about the different credentials, the software update, and I think this is an important table that we need to understand. It's very different types of AWS credentials. When we log into AWS account, we need a password. And this is the password type. We need a multi-factor authentication. This is mostly used to protect the root account. Again, multi-factor authentication doesn't mean you need two keys. This is something you have or something you know. So password is something you know. Something you have is some other external way. Like I said, this is a 6-digit single user code that's required. No, this is only the password part. Anyway, we need to understand the multi-factor authentication, and then later on, this is one of the exam objective also is the key management. AWS provide key management. This is access key where will be used for APIs and other access REST query. to the system. So sometimes we use APIs to configure our APS instances, and these access keys are necessary. One thing about this access key is that it will be generated only once, and you have to write it down and to store it in a safe place. If we miss that or we lost the key, the only way is to regenerate a new key. We have to request AWS to regenerate a new key for us. They will not generate you have to have a new key. They will not generate the old key for you, because I don't, maybe this is for security, but this is something you do. If you lost a key, you have to regenerate. And this is something called a key pair. Key pair is private key and public key pairs. This is different from the access key. Access key is only one key, but key pair is that you have to use a private key, then you have also to generate a public key, and this is how you mostly use in SSH to log in. And then there's also the X.509 certificate, which is similar to key pairs, but this is it's a digital certificate to certify who you are, to present your identity through a CA is called certification authority, because they will validate or vouch for you, because we trust that CA, the CA will vouch for you. Oh, with this certificate, this is indeed, it is me. So this is, I don't think we need to know how to generate certificates, but at least we need to understand that these are the different credential type as possible within AWS. And again, being a solution architect, we need to understand the different tools, different options, so that we can choose the appropriate options. Okay, let's move on, because later on during this paper it further explains, and we don't have time to go through the details. So I think this is important that we understand these different ways of using these security keys, or even key pairs, or the X.509 certificates. Then let's move on to the security log. This is one of the exam objectives, the Trusted Advisor security check, because this is the security check is not only for performance or resiliency, but if you look at this description, it's also for cloud security. This TripAdvisor is, some of the elements are free, some are not, and some of them you have to pay for, but at least this is something as to describe to you how the Trusted Advisor is provide security, because it will check for common security misconfiguration that can occur, including this, and I think we should look in. And one thing is that this will also help with checking to see if you are configuring your instances also correctly. This is talk about some free monitoring that you can use with that. And then moving on, I think this is the multi-level security, because it's also one of the principles for security is defense in depth. So we try to, it's like there is always a, I'm not sure that's the terminology, but in the castle there's always a river. I'm not sure that's classified as a river, but there's some water in between. So this is called layer of defense. If you break into this, you can still have another layer of defense to protect yourself from from some of these risks and attacks. It talks about one thing we need to know is that the hypervisor is a customized version of hypervisor. Then it provides the different ways of isolation. The instant isolation is very important, as we all know from the virtualization world. Instant VM isolation is very important, but also in this document it also said the physical RAM is also separated using similar mechanism as we talk about. I think not only is the VM provide isolation, the RAM is also, which is also a good way to, or good assurance for our customer that this is somewhat secure. Then especially if this, in addition, the memory allocated to guest is scribbled, set to 0 by the hypervisor, this is allocated to a guest. I think this is a very important step. Again, when I was doing the common criteria project, this is also one thing, is that some of these things we need to zero it out before we release it back to the memory pool. This picture is also important. It talks about there is a built-in internal firewall to provide resource isolation. And then it talks about the guest operating system. One thing is that AWS do not have any access right to your instance or the guest OS. So even though the resource is running at the infrastructure, AWS does not have the access right. So this is something we need to remember. Also for firewall, there's also, we look at, it's a built-in firewall. I think this is important. The default is deny all. No, we need to know how this is being configured as a default setting. And also we go to page 31 for talk about encryption. So this is the encryption on sensitive data on EBS volumes. They use the AES 256. But one important thing is that this kind of EBS encryption is only available on the EC2 on the more powerful instances. So if you are doing the free tier Amazon for practices, you might not be able to have this option available for you. But in the production environment, this encryption is available only to the more powerful instance type. So we need to remember that when we go into exam. And then later on, it talks about elastic load balance security. One thing we need to know about from this different paragraph is that the encryption and decryption works instance managed at the load balancer. That means the secured connection terminates. The SSL connection terminates at the load balancer. So it will offload some of the decryption process that you have to do on your workload. Then this use a long-term secret key to generate short-term key to be used between the server and the browser. And this is, I think, this is important as we move forward. One of the things that is nice for this load balancer is that you'll be able to identify the original IP address of the client connected to the service. This is very essential for producing an audit trail. And then later on, when something happens, we will go back to the log, that we'll be able to somewhat, it is not a foolproof, because those IP addresses can be spoofed or can be masked out with other means, but at least it's the AWS trying to identify the original IP address. Again, in security, we cannot mitigate 100% all the risk. We can only minimize the risk as much as possible, and this is one way that we can minimize the risk by identifying the original IP address of the client, so that it will produce an audit trail. It might be after the fact, but at least we might be able to get back to who is trying to sabotage your system or trying to do some misconfiguration or to do whatever bad things to your system. They will be able to somewhat trace it back. So let's talk about all these access are being locked, and then VPC is one of the big items in the security domain that we need to know. And then especially in this white paper, at least 5 or 6 pages are devoted to this VPC security. So we need to understand. First of all, it talks about using a different level of subnet. VPC is one way to provide security because it provides isolation to the other. Everyone, I think this is a new feature that is developed in 2010 or 13, I'm not sure, but this is a new way that everyone has a virtual private cloud, and then there's also a default VPC that if you do not configure any VPC yourself. Well, this is an important way to know too, because some of the configuration that we will be talking about the security group and the network access control is behave differently for default VPC and the non-default VPC, and this is something we need to understand. So we have to go through all this. This is the API access to the VPC. Is you have to SSL protect the API endpoints. You have this subnet routing table. This we will talk about it more in detail, but this is also an important way for VPC to provide security. Briefly, this is one way to security group is to secure your instance, where network access control list is to secure the subnet. So this is something later on we have a slide to print out the differentiation between these two submit so that we'll be able to better understand how these two will work together to provide security at the VPC level. Of course, you have the virtual private gateway, the internet gateways, so that you will be able to be shielded from the internet. Also, you can add the request dedicated instance, and you are provided with elastic network interface. This is, I think, provide for this. What do you call this? Is called high availability for elastic network IP, because if one of the instance goes down, if your workload is being switched to another one, the elastic IP address interface will be able to switch not quite immediately, but faster. So this is something they call the classic EC2 classic, the default VPC and the regular VPC. I think this table is also important that we know as we go into the exam. Later on, it talks about the Route 55 security. This is one of the exam objectives being mentioned on the exam objective page, and then it has a way, because we can use Route 55 to provide disaster recovery solutions. So that because there's one way, one of the options is that there is a multi-site hot standby where you can, based on Route 55, route the traffic to the failover site. Then this is how you can provide high availability, not exactly fault tolerant. But bear in mind, high HA is not fault tolerant. There are two different things. HA is just to recover as fast as possible. So could we move on? This is something CloudFront. There's something called the Data Direct. This is something that you use a dedicated facilities. You have a fiber connection or fast access into the AWS data center. This is to bypass security. Not bypass security, sorry. Slip of the tongue is bypass internet to provide security. But one of the things we have to understand is that if we use this route, this cannot be done very quickly. If you need something fast, if you need it in the next hour, if you want to have something done in the afternoon, you have to go through the regular way of going through the internet to configure your instance and to connect to from the data center to AWS. But if you want a more secure, you have to set it up. This takes more time, but this is more secure, and they use the standard AO2.1Q VLAN to do the partitioning for the virtual interfaces. This is how you connect. So I'm not sure this is being asked, but you have to configure BGP on the virtual interface. So this is mostly for, we have talked about VPC to connect, and this is something to do with the storage, how we provide data access. This is data access. We have three ways to provide data access to storage. One is the IAM policy, one is the access control list, and the last one that is specific to storage is the bucket policy. So this is, I think this table is also good to remember. And then again, you see the concept data at rest. So this is something called the server-side encryption. This is later on we have a slide on this too that will go deep into the three types of server-side encryption, and also another way is that the client-side encryption. This is how we store the data encrypted at on AWS. And then as we move on, there's something called the storage gateway security, where we talk about the different ways of storing things. This is the store volume. We will have a slide on that too later on. Talk about these three. This is more for section 3.2, where we talk about disaster recovery. This is one way, one of the services provide. Import-export is also one way that it's under exam objective under section 3.2. So this is, I think, the first 50 pages is worth going through and then understand. And then I think the next thing we need to jump to page 72, which talks about IAM. let's see, so I can scroll to 61. So I think this is important to understand that we jump to this IAM security because this is one of the exam objectives. We have group, we have user, and role. Role is very important to understand is that because a IAM role used is a temporary security credential to allow you to delegate access to user or services such as your S3 instance, so that you'll be able to access your storage. This is how we get the roles, and then there is the policy, which is in the JSON format to specify your the access credential. So it's good to know about JSON. If we know, I think at the console we can display the policy in a very nicely formatted form on the console. Of course, we look at the security watch. This is one of the exam objectives for 3.1. So we need to understand this security watch is to provide monitoring of resource, and then we'll be able, not just because for auto scaling, but we also, this is CloudWatch will be used for CloudTrail, along with CloudTrail to provide security audits. And this is pretty much about this white paper, but I was informed that that this is very important that we need to understand as we go into the exam. There's a handful. Is there any question or comment so far?
Yeah, no, that security white paper is definitely you have to read through that entire thing to be able to answer all the questions on the exam validly and lucidly. The data destruction pieces, Anthony, you nailed it. The data destruction pieces are definitely in the test.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's move on. I don't have much time. Compliance, we already talked about compliance. Again, one thing we have to stress is that written approval is a must if we want to do any pen test on our instance. Even if it's our own instance, we need to have written approval. And again, I have to stress, besides written approval, the scope of the test has to be specified so that you'll be fully protected. And these are some of the things in the picture. These are the compliance that AWS infrastructure is providing. So we can be rest assured that if we use AWS, we will at least at the infrastructure level, these are being covered. Again, this is IAM. We already talked about it in the white paper. It's the way to enable to provide fine-grained access control to the services or resources. Again, we know this is easy to understand. It's the user and groups. Role, again, we already talked about, is the temporary access credential, security credential to access for role is not for, role is more for instance or some other entities running within AWS to provide security. And of course, again, policy is in the form of specified in the form of JSON, so you can know how, who, and what can access what resource can be accessed. Again, VPC, we really talk about different ways. We have 5 or 6 pages talking about VPC security at the white paper. I think it starts on page 33. I think it's not a good sign that I remember the page number of the white paper. Okay, but let's move on. Let's talk about security. It's some of the rules how we apply security. And this is, I get it from the AWS website, the user guide. One thing I think to point out is that the ACL, the rule number. Rules are evaluated static and the lowest number rule. As soon as a rule is matches, it applies regardless of any higher number rule. Because some of the firewall, you have to evaluate all. Because I think for security group, they evaluate all and can come up with an either access or deny. But we have to remember for ACL, the lowest number start being evaluated first, and then as soon as the rule matches the traffic, it will apply and it will not go on. This is not like the example where different people go into a room. One switch the light on, one switch the light off. The last person that enters the room dictates if the light is on or off. This is how security group works. because it would be the, I'm not sure, no, I take it back. I think they need to do some research to see how they come up with the security permission. But some of the firewall rules that dictate by the last one, the last rule that say access or deny. But we have to remember in AWS VPC Security for the ACL, the first rule matches will be the one and will not move on. And then this, I think I get this also from the user guide, and this summarizes the differences between the security group and the network ACL. Because security group as the first layer of defense, it supports allows rule only, it's stateful. And what does it mean by stateful is that return traffic is automatically allowed regardless of any rules. Whereas for ACL, it is stateless. If you specify allow for inbound, you also need to specify allow for the outbound, otherwise it will not work. So this is something we need to, this is a good table to look at to go into the exam. And then we talk about the EC2 security or the different aspects. In particular, we have the security group and the network ACL. S3, we talk about different ways of providing access control, the IAM policy, access control list, and the bucket policy. And then again, this is the encryption types, where we have 3 types of server-side encryption. SSE is server-side encryption. It is S3 managed, or this is AWS key management system. With this, we need to know about this. I'm still a little bit weak on this. We have one exam objective on the key management system, and that I have a slide later on. But this key management system is AWS provide the entire key management system for you, whereas the last option for server side is the customer provide. You provide the key for the encryption. Apart from the server side, there's also the client side where the data is being encrypted before sending into AWS. And this is the way. I'm not sure if we'll be asking what the pros and cons, but at least we have to know the different options. Again, I think knowing the options available is more important than how to configure it in this solution architect exam. We talk about this in the white paper. I think we also, yes, we talk about this on the white paper. This is what I'm talking about, the encryption solution. This is one of the exam objectives. That you can create your own key. You can use Cloud HSM to create, or you can use the key management service. I was surprised, actually I'm surprised that the price for the key management service is the lowest. But I think to me it's the most convenient because AWS manage the keys for you. But again, this particular objective, I'm still a little bit weak on the detail. So at least we will know these are the 3 options. CloudTrail. CloudTrail is one of the security service provided. This is again I copy from the internet, I think, and then the SlideShare. I get it from SlideShare, and that the SlideShare I can get it from AWS. So this is round robin. CloudTrail is a log. It provides a log to identify the caller, the time, the source IP address. Again, this is a very useful information because most of the logs doesn't include the source IP address. And again, back to the common criteria project that I did in Encryption, we have to make sure that we also include the source IP address of the caller on our log system, on our switch logs. And this is CloudTrail is to provide logs for API calls. And then this is the CloudWatch. While CloudWatch is for monitoring alert system, it also works along with CloudTrail so that it will be able to provide to go through the log. This is a good blog post about this subject from Cloud Academy. This is free. You don't have to join Cloud Academy to visit the blog. And this has a good information talking about CloudWatch. Moving on, we talk about CloudTrust, and I choose this slide because it specifies what are some of the features it provides, and then it also which one are free. So this is okay. So we have spent around most of the time on domain 3.1, and let's move on to 3.2. 3.2 is mostly for disaster recovery. And as you can see, this is not too much exam objective item. It's not so much. And then let's move on. I like this picture a lot because it's fully explained, because for disaster recovery, there are two concepts. We understand the recovery point objective and the recovery time objective. I think for vBrownbag, most people are seasoned administrator or IT profession, so I don't think I need to explain what RPO and RTO are. And then this for business continuity, I think we can always look it up. Again, for AWS Disaster Recovery, there are 4 options. Those are backup and restore. We have the pilot light, we have the warm standby, and multi-site. And for data replication, there are 2 ways. One is synchronous and one is asynchronous. Synchronous is when you do a write, it's automatically being replicated to the backup site, whereas asynchronous is only replicate to the other site, secondary site, when the bandwidth system is available. So there's the main difference between synchronous. So if we use synchronous, of course, it's easier to recover because it is almost synchronous. The data is synchronously written to the 2 sites, where asynchronous, you might lose some data. I think this is the option. For the backup disaster recovery option, this is a good. I think I have to refer to this website. Let's go to this and take a look. This is my blog. This is a very good article. Then I think it talks about the 4 different ways of options available from AWS Disaster Recovery. Not only do they talk about the differences, they also talk about in detail how to configure and how you can, the key steps for backup and restore, and some of the key points about this. So I think it's just running out of time. We're not going to go through in detail, but at least it is good that we read this article, then you will have a good understanding on this and be able to answer the question on disaster recovery. They also talk about how to recover the multi-site. Not only that, at the end, they also talk about testing. And I have to mention this, an untested disaster recovery plan is not a disaster recovery plan, because you never know if you're able to recover your data or not. And then one thing about even for pilot light is that you have to have the in general, I think it mentioned a very good point here is that software licensing. For disaster recovery, software licensing for the secondary site is also important. Make sure that the secondary site is also licensed, so that when it comes live, you will have the proper license to do your work. I think this is a very good blog post that I suggest everyone going into the exam to read and understand, so that this section is covered. So going back, slide, and then I just copied the pictures from that. And this thing, I was going to talk about it, but then later on I find the actual blog post, which is very organizedly talk about it, so I don't need to talk about. But this is important. We have to understand the different options, the pros and cons. I choose this picture again. I get this from the internet. The 4 different DR options. Of course, for backup and restore is the cheapest. You see $1 sign, but then the RPO or RTO is the longest. So you can have this comparison. I think this is a good way. We must know, as a good solution architect, we need to understand the different options, the pros and cons, to see how much budget you have for your solutions to work. Then this is another exam objective listed. It's the import and export, where we can use a disk, or recently AWS has a new service called the Snowball. It's where you ship you one unit, one box, And so I think you can Google how a snowball works. I don't have it here on the slide. It's just that you put your data into the snowball, send it to AWS, they download, and then send the. I'm not sure if they send the snowball back to you. Maybe if you need to retrieve, they will send it to you. Again, this is the storage gateway. It's also one of the exam objectives. And then there are three options. The gateway caches that the primary data is stored in AWS. The most often used data is stored locally in your data center. Whereas the gateway store is that the primary data is stored in your data center, and that this is one option. And another option for storage gateways that use that as a virtual tape library, so that you dump the data into a tape library, as we have been doing it to the tape library. And this is that. And this is one of the Elastic Block. The Elastic Block store is one of the exam objectives. I think the main thing is that, again, I have to refer to this article because it talks about the concept, but it also talks about different use cases of how Elastic Block Store can help, because I think it is something you can mount, and you can also create snapshot, and this helps with disaster recovery. And then around 53, there are different routing policies. I think we need to know what they are, and especially for disaster recovery, sometimes if you use a multi-site hot standby, and the failover routing policy should be used. These are the things. Then again, all API requests with the hash function, the SHA-256 hash function, along with the AWS secret key. See, these things is just everything puts together. We talk about the secret key, how we need to generate a secret key. So this is something for the API request, and then we use the IAM control operator to work on the Route 55 to configure the domain name. And finally, I think I have covered. Oh wait, I think there are a few items on the data security 3.1 I have not covered. I don't think I covered the ingress and egress filtering, incorporating common conventional security products, complex access control, and these are the three objectives I did not cover in this time. But other than that, I think I covered most of the exam objectives.
I think you did, sir. Fantastic job.
Wow, I really speak for an hour.
A lot of data. Very well done, Anthony.
It passes
thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So we'll wait for 1 second to see if we've got any questions in there. You've been doing a fantastic job covering everything, so I think everybody's been stymied by the amount of information. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Graham just said a lot to digest tonight. Definitely,
Yeah.
Graham. Cool. All right, guys. Well, I think we're good to go. Nobody's asking any questions, so job well done.
Well, thank you. Presenting is one thing. To be able to answer dynamically the questions and be able to answer it is another level that I need to try one day.
It's, you know what, teaching is the best way to learn, because you definitely absorb a lot more.
And then last time when I did a presentation on Ansible, I did something wrong during the demo, and I was able to recover. That was one big step for me.
Oh yeah, well, dude, everybody, trust me, everybody screws up on the presentations. That's just par for the course.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks very much. Y'all have a great evening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Now time for a beer.
All right,
Thank
exactly.
you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.